What Donald Trump said about Jerusalem might signal a prophetic shift. What if a single sentence spoken from the White House podium fulfilled a 2,500-year-old prophecy? You will be shocked when you find out 5 discoveries about Trump's speech that will completely change how you see current Middle Eastern politics. Discovery 1. The day the world shifted. Picture the scene. The White House Diplomatic Reception Room. December 6, 2017. International media packed shoulder to shoulder. Cameras from every major network broadcasting live to billions of viewers worldwide. The tension was palpable because everyone knew Trump was about to make an announcement that would either make history or trigger a global crisis. Maybe both. But to understand the magnitude of what was about to happen, you need to grasp just how unprecedented this moment was. No American president had dared to officially recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital for 70 years. Every administration since 1948 had maintained the same careful diplomatic position. Jerusalem's status must be determined through negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. The U.S. Embassy would remain in Tel Aviv. Official American policy would treat Jerusalem as disputed territory. For 7 decades, this position held firm through Republican and Democratic administrations, through wars and peace processes, through changing geopolitical realities. The pressure to change it had been enormous, but every president had concluded that the risks were too great. Until Trump. When he stepped to that podium, he wasn't just changing American foreign policy. He was breaking a diplomatic taboo that had been maintained by 11 previous presidents across 7 decades. Today, we finally acknowledge the obvious that Jerusalem is Israel's capital, Trump declared. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. But then he went further. I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. I am also directing the State Department to begin preparation to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. 16 words in the first statement, 34 in the second. 50 words total that would reshape Middle Eastern politics and potentially accelerate biblical prophecy. The reaction was swift, and it was exactly what you would expect if you understood what biblical prophecy predicted would happen when this moment arrived. Within hours, the world erupted in unified opposition that was both immediate and comprehensive. The United Nations Security Council called an emergency session. The UN General Assembly scheduled a vote to condemn the move. Arab League foreign ministers convened in emergency session in Cairo. Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas declared the decision deplorable and unacceptable. Turkish president called it null and void. French president said he regretted the decision. German chancellor expressed concern. Even traditional American allies distanced themselves. Canada, Australia, nations that typically support U.S. foreign policy initiatives all expressed reservations or outright opposition. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this global reaction. It was predicted in precise detail 2,500 years ago by a Hebrew prophet who had never heard of the United States, the United Nations, or modern diplomatic protocols. Zechariah 12:3. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Read that prophecy again, and tell me it doesn't perfectly describe what happened after Trump's announcement. Jerusalem becoming a heavy stone, literally in Hebrew, a burdensome stone that's difficult to lift and dangerous to handle. all peoples finding it problematic to deal with. All nations of the earth gathering in opposition to Israel's claim to the city. The Hebrew word for heavy stone is eben ma'amasa, a stone so heavy that trying to lift it injures those who attempt it. It's not just difficult, it's dangerous. And that's exactly what happened with Trump's Jerusalem decision. Every nation that opposed it found themselves in a more difficult diplomatic position. Arab nations had to balance their relationships with America against their domestic population's anger. European allies had to choose between supporting their most important ally and maintaining their Middle East policies. Even Russia and China, typically cautious about American Middle East moves, felt compelled to voice opposition. The UN vote was the most dramatic fulfillment of this prophecy. 128 nations officially condemned Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Only 9 nations supported the move. 35 abstained. But 128 nations, representing virtually every region, culture, and political system on Earth, united in opposition to this decision about Jerusalem. That's not just international disagreement. That's all nations of the earth gathered against it. For the first time in modern history, a single decision about Jerusalem united virtually the entire world in opposition. Not since the creation of Israel in 1948 had we seen such unanimous global condemnation of an action involving the Holy City. But here's what makes this even more prophetically significant. The opposition wasn't just diplomatic. It was visceral, immediate, and emotionally charged. Palestinian leaders called for days of rage. Protests erupted in dozens of cities across the Muslim world. This was the kind of passionate, unified opposition that Zechariah described when he prophesied about Jerusalem becoming a burdensome stone that all nations would struggle against. But here's what prophecy scholars immediately recognized. This wasn't just political opposition. This was the fulfillment of a biblical pattern that had to happen before other end-times events could unfold. Throughout Scripture, Jerusalem occupies a unique position in God's prophetic plan. It's called the City of the Great King in Psalm 48, verse 2. Jesus called it the Holy City in Matthew 4, verse 5. Revelation 21 describes the New Jerusalem coming down from heaven as the eternal dwelling place of God with His people. But before Jerusalem becomes the center of God's kingdom, biblical prophecy indicates it must first become the center of global controversy. It must become the issue that divides the nations and reveals their true attitudes toward God's purposes. Trump's announcement accomplished that overnight. The clarity was unprecedented. For the first time since 1948, there was no middle ground on Jerusalem. Every nation had to choose a side. The global reaction to Trump's Jerusalem announcement wasn't the end of the prophetic sequence. It was the beginning. And what came next would fulfill biblical predictions about peace and safety that every student of prophecy should recognize as a warning sign. But before we explore those peace agreements, you need to understand something that most people missed about Trump's decision. The timing wasn't just politically significant, it may have been prophetically necessary. Discovery 2. Prophetic Trigger. Here's where things get absolutely wild. Because while the world was condemning Trump's Jerusalem decision, a group of Jewish religious leaders was making a comparison that sent chills down the spines of prophecy watchers everywhere. The nascent Sanhedrin, a modern attempt to re-establish the ancient Jewish court that will oversee the Third Temple, sent Trump a letter that reads like something straight out of biblical prophecy. They called him a Cyrus-like figure. They praised his Jerusalem recognition as divinely inspired. They suggested he was preparing the way for the rebuilding of the Jewish temple. Now, If you don't understand the biblical significance of Cyrus, let me explain why this comparison should make every student of prophecy pay attention. Cyrus was a Persian king who lived 500 years before Christ. He conquered Babylon, freed the Jewish people from exile, and gave them permission to return to Jerusalem and rebuild their temple. Isaiah 45:1 calls him God's anointed, the same Hebrew word used for Messiah. But here's what makes this absolutely remarkable. Isaiah prophesied about Cyrus by name 150 years before he was even born. God said through Isaiah, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have held, to subdue nations before him and loose the armor of kings, to open before him the double doors, so that the gates will not be shut." Cyrus wasn't Jewish. He wasn't even a believer in the God of Israel. But God used him as an instrument to accomplish his prophetic purposes for Jerusalem and the temple. Now think about the parallel. Trump isn't an Orthodox Christian by most standards. He's definitely not Jewish. But according to these Jewish leaders, God is using him the same way he used Cyrus, to restore Jerusalem and prepare for the rebuilding of the temple. And here's what should absolutely blow your mind. The comparison isn't just symbolic. There are practical parallels that are impossible to ignore. Cyrus allowed the Jews to return to their land. Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem, officially recognizing Jewish sovereignty over the city. Cyrus provided resources for rebuilding the temple. Trump's policies have strengthened Israel economically and militarily in ways that make major construction projects more feasible. Cyrus defeated Israel's enemies and removed obstacles to temple construction. Trump's Middle East policies have weakened Iran, isolated Palestinian opposition, and created conditions more favorable to Jewish temple activities than at any time since 1967. But here's the question that should terrify every student of prophecy. If Trump really is a modern Cyrus, what comes next? Because Cyrus didn't just free the Jews and give them permission to rebuild. He provided the political and military conditions that made it possible. He removed the obstacles. He defeated the enemies. He cleared the way. If the pattern holds, Trump's Jerusalem recognition wasn't the end goal. It was the preparation for something much bigger. Something that the Sanhedrin letter hinted at, but didn't explicitly state. The rebuilding of the Third Temple. And if that's what's coming next, then we're not just watching political history unfold. We're watching biblical prophecy accelerate toward events that will change everything. But the temple connection is just the beginning. Because what happened after Trump's Jerusalem announcement created the exact conditions that biblical prophecy says must exist before the final war begins. Discovery 3. The Abraham Accords. Peace before sudden destruction. Hold on to your seat, because what I'm about to show you will completely reframe how you understand Middle Eastern politics and biblical prophecy. One of the most overlooked and potentially most prophetic aspects of Trump's Jerusalem move is what it made possible: the Abraham Accords. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing. The very decision that caused global outrage somehow led to the most significant peace breakthrough in the Middle East in over 40 years. How is that even possible? September 15, 2020. The White House South Lawn. Representatives from Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain are signing historic peace agreements that every previous administration said were impossible. Within months, Sudan joined. Then Morocco. Nations that had been Israel's enemies for generations were suddenly becoming allies. But here's a mind-blowing fact that most people missed. UAE-Israel trade volume went from 0 to over $2.5 billion in just 2 years after the Abraham Accords. 0 to billions. That's not normal diplomatic progress. That's supernatural acceleration. And here's what's even more shocking. This all happened because Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The very decision that was supposed to destroy Middle Eastern peace actually created it. But prophecy students know something that should terrify you. The Bible predicts exactly this kind of peace right before the end times. And it's not the good kind of peace. Listen carefully to 1 Thessalonians 5:3. For when they say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes upon them, as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Did you catch that? When people are saying peace and safety, sudden destruction arrives like labor pains, intensifying rapidly until something new is born. Now look at what world leaders were saying after the Abraham Accords. UAE officials talked about regional stability. Bahraini leaders spoke of lasting security. Israeli officials celebrated unprecedented peace. The exact words, peace and safety, that the Bible warns about. But here's what makes the Abraham Accords prophetically terrifying. They weren't just any peace deals. They were Abraham peace deals, named after the father of 3 major religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The man to whom God made the original promise about the land of Israel. Think about the prophetic significance. A peace deal named after Abraham, brokered by a man being compared to Cyrus, involving the land promised to Abraham's descendants, centered around the city where Abraham was willing to sacrifice his son. But here's what should make every prophecy student pay attention. The Abraham Accords accomplished something that seemed impossible. They made Israel feel secure, prosperous, and peaceful. And according to biblical prophecy, that's exactly the condition Israel needs to be in for the next major prophetic event. Ezekiel 38:11 gives us the clue. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Israel dwelling peacefully, securely, prosperously, without walls or gates, meaning they feel so safe they don't need heavy defenses. The Abraham Accords created exactly those conditions. For the first time in Israel's modern history, they have peace treaties with multiple Arab neighbors. They're experiencing unprecedented economic growth. They feel more secure than they have in decades. But here's what happens next in Ezekiel's prophecy, and it should send chills down your spine. That's exactly when the massive northern coalition led by Russia and Iran decides to attack. The peace isn't permanent. It's preparatory. And the most terrifying part? The coalition that's going to break this peace is already forming exactly as biblical prophecy predicted. Discovery 4. The Ezekiel Trap. Iran, Turkey, Russia, converge. What I'm about to show you will make your blood run cold, because every single move Iran has made since Trump's Jerusalem announcement has walked them straight into an ancient prophetic trap that was set 2,600 years ago. 2,600 years ago, the prophet Ezekiel had a vision of a battle so massive it would make World War II look like a skirmish. He saw armies from the north, south, and east converging on Israel in the largest military coalition in human history. But here's the terrifying part. He didn't just describe what would happen. He named the specific countries that would be involved. And they all exist today. Ezekiel 38:2-3. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. For centuries, biblical scholars puzzled over these ancient names. Magog, Rosh, Meshech, Tubal, they sounded like relics from a forgotten world. But modern archaeological and linguistic research has identified exactly which modern nations these ancient names represent. And when you see the list, you'll understand why this prophecy is causing such concern among students of biblical prophecy today. Magog, the land of Gog, has been consistently identified by biblical scholars as modern-day Russia. The ancient historian Josephus connected Magog with the Scythians, who inhabited the regions north of the Black and Caspian Seas. This corresponds precisely with modern Russia, particularly the southern regions that border the Middle East. Rosh, many Hebrew scholars believe this refers to the ancient name for Russia itself. The Hebrew word Rosh simply means head or chief, but in this context, it appears to be a proper noun referring to a specific people group in the far north. Meshech and Tubal, these ancient peoples inhabited regions that correspond to modern-day Turkey. Archaeological evidence shows that Meshech was centered in what is now Ankara, Turkey's capital, while Tubal was located in the eastern part of modern Turkey. But Ezekiel doesn't stop there. He goes on to list the allies of this northern coalition in verse 5. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, this is unambiguous. Until 1935, Iran was officially called Persia. The country's modern name changed, but its identity in biblical prophecy remained clear. Ethiopia, the ancient kingdom of Cush, which encompassed modern-day Sudan and southern Egypt, as well as Ethiopia proper. Libya, still called Libya today, the North African nation that has been in chaos since the Arab Spring. So the coalition that Ezekiel prophesied 2,600 years ago consists of Russia, Magog, Rosh, Turkey, Meshech, Tubal, Iran, Persia, and various African allies including Libya and Sudan. It's basically every country that's currently hostile to Israel, forming exactly the alliance that biblical prophecy predicted would emerge in the last days. But here's what should absolutely stagger you. Before Trump's Jerusalem announcement in December 2017, this coalition existed more in theory than in practice. Iran and Russia were regional competitors as much as they were allies. Turkey was still a NATO member, officially committed to Western values and Israeli security. But watch what happened after Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Within 24 hours of Trump's announcement, Iran's supreme leader, but here's what's truly remarkable. By raging against Trump's Jerusalem decision, Iran was fulfilling biblical prophecy written 2,600 years before Trump was even born. Because Ezekiel 38:10-11 describes exactly this kind of reaction. On that day, it shall come to pass that thoughts will arise in your mind, and you will make an evil plan. You will say, I will go up against a land of unwalled villages. I will go to a peaceful people who dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates. Evil thoughts arising in the mind, an evil plan being formulated, a decision to attack Israel when they're dwelling peacefully and securely without heavy defenses. This is exactly what we're seeing from Iran's leadership today. But the prophetic precision goes much deeper than just Iran's reaction. Trump's Jerusalem move systematically pushed each member of the Ezekiel 38 coalition toward exactly the kind of alliance the prophet described. Before Trump's Jerusalem announcement, Russia and Iran had a complex relationship characterized more by competition than cooperation.